Hi, this is Lori, and I'm going to take a few minutes to discuss Chapter 2 or some highlights from Chapter 2, which is rulemaking. And really, the objectives of this chapter is to familiarize you with the sources that governs rulemaking for administrative agencies. In a different week, the class will go through some steps on how to research rules and regulations. But that is not the objective of this week's assignments, readings, or PowerPoint. So administrative law agency rulemaking. Let's start out with, you want to be able to identify when you leave this class what is the source or the main source of authority that governs what administrative agencies can and cannot do. So for federal agencies, that's going to be the Federal Administrative Procedure Act. And you can think of it as the how-to. What I mean by that, you can really think of this as the kind of like the civil rules of procedure. These are the administrative rules of procedure for federal agencies. And that particular act is going to govern, or does govern, really what agencies can and cannot do. The Federal Code of Regulations is the collective code that includes all of the rules and regulations enacted by the federal agencies. So it is similar to, let's say, the Illinois compiled statutes, in that it collects, the Illinois compiled statutes are all of the Illinois laws. The Federal Code of Regulation is all of the federal agencies' rules and regulations. Be mindful that each individual agency, especially at their websites, publish their own rules and regulations. So the code brings all of them to one place. The Federal Register is a collection of pending rules and regulations. So if we wanted to know if a particular agency has a pending rule that we would like to comment on, or if a hearing is involved, to attend the hearing, the Federal Register is the place to find those pending rules that will tell us what the proposed rule is, the purpose of it, the comment period, and how we can go about, we being the citizens, on commenting on those particular pending rules. In Illinois, we have the Illinois Administrative Procedure Act, and I have provided links to all of these sources. We have the Illinois Register, which is the pending rules and regulations for all the Illinois agencies, and then the Illinois Administrative Code. The Illinois Administrative Code is where all of the Illinois regulations are collectively put together in one place. So now you are familiar with the three places that we could get what governs agencies and then their individual rules and regulations. The rulemaking that you're introduced to in Chapter 2 really is to have you, one, understand that the role of the administrative agency in their rulemaking ability is to really carry out what the legislative branch intended. If you may recall from Chapter 1, you learned about an enabling statute or enabling statutes. That's the statute that gives, or statutes that give agencies power. So that means that's what the purpose and intent of the agency is to carry out that intent and purpose of the legislative body. So for example, if the EPA has an act, and they do, for clean, I shouldn't say they, the Congress has an act, Clean Water Act. Doesn't seem to apply to Michigan right now. But the Clean Water Act, in one of the purposes of that act is to establish boundaries or rule or laws governing what is clean water and how to keep our water clean. The EPA is the federal agency that is given the authority to carry out the intended purpose of the Clean Water Act, which means the EPA can pass regulations on determining what would be toxic levels that would then make water unclean, how to test for those toxic levels, and how to clean up if the water fails to test, and then what are the penalties or sanctions for companies that contribute to the toxics that would cause us to have unclean water. So that's an example of what the rulemaking process is for an agency. It really is to pass rules that would help carry out the intention of the legislative branch. And most administrative agencies are engaged in informal rulemaking. Informal rulemaking does not require a hearing. A hearing would mean that the public could be present, officials could be present. It would be like a mini trial. But for regular rulemaking or informal rulemaking, agencies don't have to have such a formal hearing, but they must give notice to the public of the intended rule, the purpose of the rule, and give the public opportunity to respond and comment about that particular rule. So this becomes our legislative process to the administrative agencies. So the public is on notice what all these different agencies are doing, and the public has a right, just as we do with our Congress or our Illinois General Assembly, we have a right to be involved. We have a right to say something like we don't agree with that rule or we do want that rule. We also have the right to propose to administrative agencies the kinds of regulations or rules that we think they should be enacting. Once the informal rule-making process has occurred, which means the public has had an opportunity to respond, once the comment period ends, then the agency is going to finalize or can finalize the regulation. Once the regulation is finalized, then it's going to be posted in the Code of Federal Regulations. Until then, until the rule is finalized, it is going to be in the Federal Register. Formal rulemaking has to be acknowledged in the enabling statute, or said in another way, the enabling statute would require formal rulemaking, and your textbook identifies the FDA as one of those agencies that must have formal rulemaking. So on their proposed rules, they must have an actual hearing. They must take evidence and testimony. It is not as stringent as a trial before a court, but it is a process whereby the FDA has to prove up proof of the necessity for the particular rule that they are going to or would like to enforce. There are some areas that are identified as exempted rules. Exempted rules is where agencies, or I should say the Administrative Procedure Act actually exempts agencies from the formal or informal rulemaking for the category of rules that are located on page 64. And one of those categories would be rules that govern the agency itself with respect to its own management or its own personnel. It would be relevant to their inside policy making. So that's going to certainly to carry out or to have rules within the agency to carry out their job. They have the discretion to do that. Some of that would be exempt from the public being involved. And so that's an example of exempted rules. But to find some additional ones, you can look on page 64. What's interesting about administrative agency law is, for the most part, a lot of our laws that govern our everyday life really comes from administrative agency law. And that may be what some people mean by big government. Let's get big government out of our lives. That's suggesting that maybe there are too many agencies that are establishing rules and regulations that tell us, or even more important for that argument, tells corporate America what to do and what cannot do. Another way to look at that, though, these are agencies that may help protect the public or help advance our rights, may also be helping protect corporate America as well. But administrative law lends itself to that discussion about big government, because this is where you get all those rules and regulations that have a large impact on what corporate America cannot do. But we need some of those testing processes to keep us safe, especially for pharmaceuticals and automobiles, which is a major area of, or I should say, administrative agencies play a large impact just on that. Another category that I would like for you to be familiar with when you leave our course is knowing procedural law versus substantive law, or what's identified as legislative rules and administrative agency law. Procedural law is really the process. It's the how-to. But administrative agencies also can legislate or pass regulations on substantive laws. So a substantive law, like you must keep the water clean, means that the agency can actually enforce that and impose penalties or sanctions for failure to comply with those particular regulations. And so that this is what this slide is saying. They can impose the penalties and mandates for that particular rule. Interpretive rules is where an agency decides or declares what they think something means. You might see this from the IRS, where they will tell us what they think a particular statute means, but that's not binding. That's just an idea for the general citizen or professionals dealing with that agency to understand perhaps how an agency would interpret statutory law. So that's what the interpretive rules are. And I just thought, just real quick, I have, let's take a virtual field trip. What I have here in your view is a link to the Federal Register. It is organized in such a way that allows us to find proposed rules under the current issue, notices, significant documents. You can browse and find the different agencies and what those agencies are doing by way of proposed rules and notices and meetings. I also had a link here to the Illinois Register, which is our proposed rules for the state of Illinois, and to the U.S. Code, to the Administrative Procedure Act. And so here's an example of the Administrative Procedure Act has rules about open meetings. If an entity or how an agency must provide notice if they're going to have meetings that impact their day-to-day activities. So that's just an overview. Again, in the upcoming weeks, we will, as a class, actually learn how to research the Federal Code of Regulations, the Federal Register, the Illinois Register, and the Illinois Code of Regulations, Illinois Administrative Code, I should say. So that gives you will have an idea how to use those sources. I think in modern time with technology, if you already know the agency that established the regulations you're interested in, their websites, each agency's websites also provide access to their regulations. By the end of our semester together, you should be familiar with how to find those regulations in both ways, at the agency's website by navigating their website, as well as using the resources that I talked about today. So if you have any questions, please contact me, but otherwise, good luck.